She was left alone with her baby in the heart of the Arizona desert, no water, no hope, and death closing in. But just as her strength gave out, someone appeared on the horizon. And what happened next will stay with you long after the story ends. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked this story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the Arizona desert. Sarah Bennett clutched her 3-month-old daughter to her chest, trying to shield the infant from the relentless heat. Her cracked lips trembled as she stumbled forward, one foot in front of the other. The water canteen hanging from her shoulder had been empty since dawn, and the small bundle of supplies her husband had left behind was nearly depleted. "It's going to be all right, Emma," she whispered to her whimpering child. "We'll find water soon." But Sarah knew her words were empty promises. James had abandoned them 3 days ago, claiming he couldn't handle the responsibility of a family in these harsh frontier lands. He'd taken their wagon, their horse, and most of their supplies, leaving Sarah with just enough to survive a day or two. Now, on the 3rd day, death seemed inevitable. The year was 1879, and the Arizona territory was as unforgiving as it was vast. Sarah had come west with James, full of dreams of a new life. The daughter of a Boston merchant, she had fallen for the charming drifter despite her parents' objections. Now she understood why they had warned her against him. As the sun reached its zenith, Sarah's legs finally gave out. She collapsed to her knees, still holding Emma protectively against her. The baby's cries had grown weaker, a sign that dehydration was taking its toll. "Please God," Sarah prayed, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "Not my baby. Take me if you must, but spare my Emma." In the distance, a figure appeared, shimmering in the heat waves rising from the desert floor. At first, Sarah thought it might be a mirage, a cruel trick of her desperate mind. But as the silhouette grew larger, she realized it was a man on horseback. Fear gripped her heart. The tensions between settlers and the native tribes were high in this region. Stories of raids and violence had been part of their journey west. But in her current state, Sarah had no strength to run or hide. The rider approached cautiously. He was clearly Comanche, with long black hair and skin bronzed by the sun. His face was stern but not threatening, his eyes assessing the woman and child with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Across his saddle lay a freshly killed deer. "Water," Sarah managed to croak, holding Emma up slightly as if to emphasize her desperation. "Please, my baby needs water." The warrior studied her for a long moment. He had been returning to his small hunting party after a successful hunt when he spotted the white woman and her child. Lone Wolf, as he was called by his people, had every reason to ride past. The white settlers had pushed his tribe from their ancestral lands, forcing them into increasingly barren territories. But the woman's pleading eyes and the infant's weak cries spoke to something deeper than tribal conflicts. With a slight nod, he dismounted and retrieved a water skin from his saddle. Sarah accepted it with trembling hands, first moistening Emma's lips and then taking small sips herself. The water was warm, but felt like the sweetest nectar she had ever tasted. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice stronger now. "You saved our lives." Lone Wolf nodded again, his expression still guarded. He glanced around, clearly looking for others who might be with her. "My husband... double coat." Sarah hesitated, shame coloring her words. "He left us 3 days ago." Understanding dawned in the warrior's eyes. Abandonment was a grave offense in his culture, especially of a mother and child. He looked at the small bundle of the woman's remaining supplies, then at the vast desert surrounding them, and made a decision. Using gestures and the few English words he knew, Lone Wolf indicated that Sarah should come with him. His hunting party had made camp not far from there, and they would return to their small settlement the next day. Sarah hesitated. Going with a Comanche warrior was frightening and went against everything she had been told. But staying in the desert meant certain death for both her and Emma. "I'll go with you," she finally said, struggling to her feet. Lone Wolf helped her onto his horse, placing her securely in front of him with the baby cradled between them. As they rode toward his camp, Sarah felt a strange mix of fear and hope. She had lost everything she had known, but perhaps she and Emma had been given a second chance at life. The sun began its descent as they approached a small encampment nestled against a rocky outcropping. 3 other Comanche warriors looked up in surprise as Lone Wolf arrived with the white woman and her baby. Sarah could feel their suspicious stares, but Lone Wolf spoke to them in their language, his tone firm but respectful. After what seemed like an eternity, one of the older warriors nodded and gestured toward the fire. That night, Sarah ate venison from Lone Wolf's hunt and drank from the clear spring that bubbled up near their camp. Emma, refreshed by water and cooled by the evening air, slept peacefully for the first time in days. As stars filled the desert sky, Sarah watched Lone Wolf speaking with his companions. She couldn't understand their words, but she could sense the debate her presence had caused. She wondered what tomorrow would bring, and whether she had made the right choice in trusting this silent warrior who had offered help when she needed it most. "Thank you," she said again when Lone Wolf approached to check on them before retiring to his bedroll. "I don't know your name, but I owe you our lives." "Lone Wolf," he replied in accented English, surprising her. Then he pointed to her. "Sarah," she said, "and this is Emma." He nodded once, his expression softening slightly as he looked at the sleeping infant. Then he returned to his place by the fire, leaving Sarah to wonder about the strange turn her life had taken and what fate awaited them in the Comanche settlement. The journey to the Comanche settlement took most of the following day. Sarah rode behind Lone Wolf on his horse, Emma secured in a makeshift sling across her chest. The other warriors followed, occasionally casting suspicious glances her way. The desert landscape gradually gave way to more varied terrain, sparse vegetation, rocky outcroppings, and eventually, a small creek that marked the boundary of their territory. As they approached the settlement, Sarah's anxiety mounted. What reception awaited a white woman and her child in a Comanche camp? The stories she'd heard from other settlers painted a grim picture, but the man who had saved them had shown nothing but kindness, even if it was a reserved, cautious kind. The settlement came into view, a collection of tipis arranged in a semicircle, with smoke rising from cooking fires. Children playing near the perimeter spotted the returning hunting party and ran toward them, their excited voices carrying on the afternoon breeze. When they noticed Sarah and Emma, they stopped abruptly, their curiosity evident in their wide eyes. A crowd began to gather as Lone Wolf helped Sarah dismount. She stood nervously, clutching Emma to her chest, feeling the weight of dozens of stares. The murmuring among the tribe members grew louder, and Sarah recognized the tension in their voices even without understanding the words. An elderly woman emerged from the largest tipi, her face deeply lined with age but her back still straight and proud. She wore an elaborate necklace of beads and animal teeth that marked her as someone of importance. The crowd parted respectfully as she approached. Lone Wolf stepped forward and spoke to the woman at length, occasionally gesturing toward Sarah and Emma. Sarah watched the elder's expression, trying to gauge her reaction. After what seemed like an eternity, the old woman approached Sarah, her dark eyes scrutinizing both mother and child. "My grandmother, Morning Star, is our medicine woman," Lone Wolf explained in his limited English. "She asks why you are alone." Sarah swallowed hard, finding her voice. "My husband abandoned us in the desert. He took our wagon and supplies. Left us to die." The shame of saying these words aloud brought fresh tears to her eyes, but she blinked them away, determined to maintain her dignity. Lone Wolf translated, and the old woman's expression shifted from suspicion to something more complex, a mixture of disapproval and sympathy. She reached out with gnarled fingers to touch Emma's cheek, then said something to Lone Wolf. "She says no child should suffer for father's weakness," he translated. "You stay until you strong again, then we decide." Relief washed over Sarah like a cool rain. "Thank you," she said, directing her gratitude to both Lone Wolf and Morning Star. "I won't be a burden." The next few days were a steep learning curve for Sarah. Morning Star assigned a young woman named Little Dove to help her. Little Dove spoke no English, but through gestures and patience, she taught Sarah how to care for Emma using the tribe's methods, how to make a more comfortable sling, how to prepare a paste of certain roots that soothed the baby's heat rash, how to wash clothes in the creek. Sarah observed the daily life of the settlement, noting the division of labor, the respect shown to elders, and the communal care of children. It was so different from the individualistic lifestyle of white settlers, yet there was an undeniable efficiency and harmony to it. Lone Wolf kept his distance, but Sarah often felt his eyes on her. He was respected in the tribe, not a chief, but a warrior of standing whose opinion carried weight. She learned from Little Dove's gestures that he had lost his wife to sickness 2 winters ago, and had no children. On her 5th day in the settlement, Sarah decided it was time to contribute. She approached a group of women preparing hides for tanning and gestured her willingness to help. They looked skeptical but allowed her to join them. Her merchant father had ensured she learned fine needlework, and while this was different, her dexterity soon impressed the Comanche women. That evening, as she sat near a cooking fire with Emma sleeping peacefully beside her, Lone Wolf approached and sat down a respectful distance away. "You work well today," he said. "Women say you have good hands." "I want to help," Sarah replied. "You've all been kind to us." Lone Wolf nodded, his gaze moving to the sleeping infant. "The child is stronger now." "Yes, thanks to your people's care." Sarah hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling her. "What will happen to us, Lone Wolf?" "When we are strong again," as Morning Star said. He was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. "These are difficult times for my people. The white soldiers push us from our lands. Many would not trust any white face." He looked at her directly. "But to abandon a mother and child is wrong in any language. Morning Star says this. I say this. So, we can stay?" Sarah asked, hope rising in her chest. "For now," he replied cautiously. "But you must understand. Some in tribes still distrust. You must prove yourself worthy of protection." Sarah nodded, understanding the precarious nature of their situation. "I will work hard. I will learn your ways. I have nowhere else to go, and Emma needs—" She trailed off, not quite sure how to express the sense of safety she'd found here, despite the initial fear. "Emma needs family," Lone Wolf finished for her. "All children need family." The simple truth of his words struck Sarah deeply. "Yes," she whispered, "she does." Their conversation was interrupted by shouting from the perimeter of the camp. "Lone Wolf was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Sarah gathered Emma in her arms, heart racing as she saw warriors running toward the source of the commotion. "Stay here," Lone Wolf commanded, then ran to join the others. Sarah held Emma close, trying to calm her own breathing as the baby stirred, disturbed by the sudden movement. Around her, women were gathering children and moving them toward the center of the settlement. Little Dove appeared at her side, gesturing urgently for her to follow. She led Sarah to Morning Star's tipi, where several women and children were already gathered. The old medicine woman sat calmly in the center, her expression grave but composed. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, knowing they couldn't understand her words but hoping her tone would convey the question. Morning Star spoke, and Little Dove tried to mime the meaning. "Men on horses, soldiers perhaps." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. U.S. cavalry, most likely patrolling for hostile natives. What would they think of a white woman living among the Comanche? Would they assume she was a captive? Would they force her to leave with them? The thought of being separated from the people who had saved her and Emma filled her with unexpected dread. In less than a week, this place had become more of a home than the wagon she'd shared with James had ever been. Outside, they could hear the sound of hoofbeats approaching, then men's voices calling out in English. Sarah recognized the authoritative tone of military officers. She looked down at Emma, then at the women around her, their faces tense with fear and uncertainty. In that moment, Sarah Bennett made a decision that would forever alter the course of her life. "I need to go out there," Sarah said, rising to her feet. The Comanche women looked at her with alarm, and Little Dove grabbed her arm, shaking her head vigorously. Morning Star said something in a commanding tone, and Little Dove reluctantly released Sarah's arm. The old medicine woman approached, her eyes searching Sarah's face. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded once and stepped aside. "I won't let them hurt your people," Sarah promised, though she knew they couldn't understand. Her words, "You saved us, now it's my turn." With Emma securely wrapped against her chest, Sarah stepped out of the tipi into the fading daylight. At the edge of the settlement, she could see 5 U.S. cavalry soldiers on horseback, their blue uniforms stark against the desert backdrop. Lone Wolf and several other warriors stood facing them, weapons lowered but clearly ready. One of the soldiers, a lieutenant by his insignia, was speaking loudly and slowly, as if volume could bridge the language gap. "We are looking for a white woman and her infant, reported missing from a wagon train 3 weeks ago. Her husband claims Comanche raiders took them." Sarah's blood ran cold. James had not only abandoned them, but was now lying to cover his actions. She moved forward, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "I am the woman you're looking for," she called out, her voice stronger than she expected. All heads turned toward her, the soldiers with surprise. The Comanche with concern. The lieutenant spurred his horse forward a few steps. "Ma'am, are you Sarah Bennett? We've been searching for you for over a week." "I am," she confirmed, walking closer but stopping near Lone Wolf, whose tension she could feel like a physical force. "But I was not captured, Lieutenant. These people saved my life and my daughter's life." The officer frowned, confusion evident on his sunburned face. "Your husband reported that Comanche raiders attacked your wagon, killed your driver, and took you and the child." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "My husband was our driver, Lieutenant. And he's very much alive, or was when he abandoned us in the desert, with barely a day's worth of water and supplies." She took a deep breath. "This man," she gestured to Lone Wolf, "found us dying of thirst and brought us here. His people have cared for us, fed us, sheltered us." The lieutenant exchanged glances with his men, clearly unsure how to proceed. "Ma'am, regardless of the circumstances, we need to escort you back to Fort Benton. It's not proper for a white woman to remain among savages." Murmurs arose from the Comanche warriors at the insult, though they couldn't understand the specific word. The tension in the air thickened. "These people are not savages," Sarah said firmly. "They have shown more humanity than my own husband. I will not go with you." "Mrs. Bennett, I'm afraid you don't have a choice," the lieutenant said, his hand moving to rest on his holstered pistol. "We have orders to retrieve you." Lone Wolf stepped slightly in front of Sarah, his gesture protective rather than possessive. He spoke a few words in Comanche, then in broken English. "She chooses to stay. You go now." The lieutenant's face hardened. "Stand aside, Indian. This woman belongs with her own kind." "Lieutenant," Sarah interjected before the situation could escalate further, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" After a hesitation, he nodded and dismounted, walking a short distance away from both his men and the Comanche. Sarah followed, adjusting Emma in her sling. "Lieutenant, what is your name?" she asked when they were out of earshot. "Lieutenant Thomas Parker, ma'am." "Lieutenant Parker, I understand you're following orders, but you need to understand my situation. My husband, James Bennett, abandoned Usasadai. These people saved us and have treated us with nothing but kindness." She took a calculated risk. "Are you a family man, Lieutenant?" "I have a wife and 2 children back in Kansas," he admitted. "Then imagine how you would feel if someone who had abandoned your wife and children to die came looking for them, claiming they'd been kidnapped." She let that sink in. "James doesn't want me back, Lieutenant. He wants to cover his crime. If you take me to Fort Benton, he'll either abandon us again or worse." Parker frowned, clearly troubled. "Mrs. Bennett, I sympathize with your situation, but I have my orders." "Then change them," Sarah pressed. "Report that you found no trace of U.S., or that you found evidence we died in the desert." Anything but forcing us to return to a man who left his infant daughter to die of thirst. The lieutenant looked at her for a long moment, then at Emma, who had awakened and was gazing at him with innocent blue eyes. His expression softened. The military has no jurisdiction over domestic matters, only Indian attacks. If, as you say, there was no attack. There was none, Sarah confirmed. Only kindness from strangers when my own husband showed none. Parker ran a hand through his short beard, clearly conflicted. I could report that we found evidence suggesting you both perished in the desert. There would be an investigation, but without bodies. He left the implication hanging. Thank you, Sarah said, relief washing over her. That's all I ask. But Mrs. Bennet, Parker continued, lowering his voice, you need to understand what you're choosing. Life among the Comanche is hard, especially for an outsider. And if you ever change your mind. I understand the choice I'm making, Sarah interrupted gently. Better than you might think. They returned to the waiting groups, the tension still thick in the air. Parker mounted his horse and addressed his men. We've been misinformed. There was no raid. Mrs. Bennet's husband abandoned her, and she was rescued by these people. She has chosen to remain with them for now. The soldiers exchanged surprised glances, but none questioned their officer. Parker turned to Lone Wolf, who had been watching the exchange intently. You take care of them, he said, not quite a question. And not quite a command. Lone Wolf nodded once, his expression solemn. They are under my protection. With that, Parker signaled to his men, and they turned their horses away from the settlement. As they rode off, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders, even as she recognized the magnitude of her decision. Lone Wolf turned to her, his dark eyes questioning. You choose to stay? Yes, Sarah said simply. If your people will have us. He translated for the gathered Comanche, and a discussion ensued, with several warriors speaking passionately. Morning Star's voice eventually rose above the others, her words carrying authority despite her age. When she finished, a silence fell over the group. What did she say? Sarah asked. She says the spirits brought you to us for a reason. That Emma's spirit is strong, like a Comanche child. That you showed courage facing the soldiers. Lone Wolf's expression remained serious. She says you may stay and learn our ways. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in the small tipi that had been prepared for them, Sarah sat outside under a vast canopy of stars. The settlement had grown quiet, with only the occasional crackle of dying fires breaking the silence. She heard soft footsteps approaching and looked up to see Lone Wolf. He sat down beside her, offering a small wooden cup filled with what smelled like herbal tea. Thank you, she said, accepting it gratefully. The night had grown cool, and the warm drink was welcome. They sat in companionable silence for a while, both looking up at the stars. You made difficult choice today, Lone Wolf finally said. Brave choice. Sarah sipped her tea, considering her words. It didn't feel like a choice, really. Those soldiers would have taken us back to Fort Benton, where James would have either abandoned us again, or... She couldn't finish the thought. Lone Wolf nodded in understanding. Some men are not worthy to be called father. In your tribe, Sarah asked, what happens to women whose husbands abandon them? Family takes them in. Tribe protects them. Children belong to all of us. He gestured toward the settlement. Here, no one starves alone. The simple truth of his words moved Sarah deeply. In the white settlements, a woman without a husband often faced destitution and scorn, especially one with a child. Here, despite being an outsider, she had been given shelter and protection. I want to learn, she said suddenly. Everything, your language, your customs. I want Emma to know both worlds. She turned to face him. Will you help us, Lone Wolf? He studied her face in the starlight, his expression thoughtful. It will not be easy path. Some will always see you as outsider. I know, she acknowledged. But nothing worth doing is ever easy. For the first time since they'd met, Sarah saw Lone Wolf's smile, a small one, but genuine. Tomorrow we begin, he said. 1 year passed, then another. The seasons turned in their ancient rhythm, scorching summers, brief colorful autumns, harsh winters, and vibrant springs. With each passing month, Sarah and Emma became more integrated into the life of the tribe. Sarah's Comanche vocabulary grew daily, and though her accent remained distinctly foreign, she could now converse with most members of the tribe. Emma, who had just passed her 3rd birthday, was already fluent in both English and Comanche, switching between languages with the ease of the truly young. Sarah made sure to speak English with her daily, telling her stories of Boston and reading from the few books she had managed to salvage from her previous life: a Bible, a volume of Shakespeare, and a dog-eared copy of Little Women. The tribe had moved their settlement twice during this time, following traditional patterns to avoid depleting any one area's resources. Sarah had learned to pack up their tipi efficiently, to ride with confidence, and to contribute meaningfully to the community's needs. Her skill with needlework had evolved into an ability to create intricate beadwork on moccasins and clothing, items that were sometimes traded with other tribes or, occasionally, with trusted white traders. On this particular morning, Sarah was teaching Emma how to identify edible plants near their current settlement, which was situated in a fertile valley with a year-round stream. Little Dove, now Sarah's closest friend despite their initial language barrier, accompanied them with her own daughter, who was a few months older than Emma. "This one, Mama?" Emma asked, pointing to a plant with small white flowers. Sarah examined it carefully. "No, sweetheart. That looks similar to wild carrot, but see these red spots on the stem? That means it's poison hemlock. Remember, spots on the stem, don't touch them." Emma nodded solemnly, taking her mother's lessons in survival seriously despite her young age. "Like Lone Wolf taught us." "Yes, exactly like Lone Wolf taught us," Sarah smiled, thinking of the patient hours the warrior had spent showing them which plants were safe and which were dangerous. Lone Wolf had become a constant presence in their lives, though always maintaining a respectful distance. He had taught Sarah to hunt small game, to read weather patterns, to navigate by the stars. To Emma, he was a protective figure who brought her small treasures: a pretty stone, a hawk's feather, a tiny carved wooden horse. The tribe had noticed his attention to the white woman and her child, and there had been talk, though never within Sarah's hearing. Their plant gathering was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats. Little Dove tensed but relaxed when she recognized the riders as their own hunting party returning early. Something in their urgency, however, set Sarah on alert. "Stay with Little Dove," she instructed Emma, then hurried toward the settlement. Lone Wolf dismounted as she approached, his expression grave. "White soldiers," he said without preamble. "Many, coming this way." Sarah's heart sank. Over the past 2 years, relations between the Comanche and the U.S. Army had deteriorated further. The tribe had managed to avoid major conflicts by staying mobile and avoiding confrontation, but tensions were always high. "How many, how far?" she asked. 2 days' ride, maybe 50 men. His dark eyes met hers. "They have cannons." Sarah's blood ran cold. This was no ordinary patrol. This was a force intended to subdue or destroy. "We need to move," now Lone Wolf nodded. "Council mates, you should come." The tribal council consisted of the chief, 4 bears, the elder warriors, and Morning Star as the medicine woman. Sarah, despite her integration into the tribe, had never been invited to a council meeting before. She followed Lone Wolf to the central fire, where the leaders were already gathering. 4 bears. An imposing man in his 50s with a face lined by sun and hardship acknowledged her presence with a nod. In the 2 years she had lived among them, he had gradually come to accept her, though he remained more reserved than some. The discussion was held in Comanche, and Sarah followed it closely, occasionally asking Lone Wolf to clarify a word or phrase she didn't understand. The scouts reported that the soldiers were methodically searching the territory, and their current path would bring them directly to the settlement within 2 days. "We should fight," one of the younger warriors argued. "This is our land." "And die under their cannons?" countered an older warrior. We must move, find safer ground. There is no safer ground, 4 bears said heavily. Everywhere we go, they follow. The buffalo are gone. The hunting grounds shrink. Now they bring big guns to force us onto the reservation. Sarah listened, her heart heavy. The reservation system was crushing the free-roaming lifestyle of the Comanche. The conditions on the reservations were often abysmal, with inadequate food, rampant disease, and the systematic destruction of traditional ways. Morning Star, who had been silent until now, spoke up. The white woman has lived among us for 2 winters. She knows their ways. Perhaps she can speak to them. All eyes turned to Sarah. She felt the weight of their gaze, the mixture of hope and skepticism. I can try, she said carefully, but I don't know if they will listen. These are soldiers, following orders, not individuals making their own decisions. 4 bears studied her intently. You have become one of us in many ways, Sarah Bennett. Your daughter speaks our language, wears our clothes, knows our stories. Would you go back to the white world if you could? It was a question Sarah had asked herself many times over the past 2 years. No, she said firmly. This is our home now. Emma and I belong here. The chief nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. Then you will go to the soldiers with Lone Wolf and 2 others. You will tell them we wish no fight. We will move north, away from their path, if they allow it. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than waiting for an armed confrontation that the tribe could not win. Sarah agreed, though she felt a flutter of apprehension at the thought of facing U.S. Army officers again. They set out at dawn the next day, Sarah, Lone Wolf, and 2 other warriors named Running Elk and Silent Water. They rode directly toward the approaching soldiers, hoping to intercept them before they came too close to the settlement. They spotted the military column around midday, a long line of blue uniformed men on horseback with supply wagons, and as Lone Wolf had reported, 2 cannons being pulled by teams of horses. Sarah felt a moment of panic at the sight of such force arrayed against her adopted people. Lone Wolf sensed her fear. Remember why we come, he said simply. For the children, for Emma. His words steadied her. They rode forward slowly, hands raised in the universal gesture of peace. A scouting party from the military column spotted them and approached cautiously, rifles ready. I am Sarah Bennett, she called out when they were within earshot. I wish to speak with your commanding officer. The scouts, clearly surprised to hear perfect English from a woman dressed in Comanche clothing, escorted them to the main column. The commanding officer, a Colonel Harrison by his insignia, regarded them with suspicion. Sarah Bennett, he repeated. The name is familiar. Weren't you reported dead 2 years ago? Lost in the desert? Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Sarah replied, drawing on her Shakespeare. My daughter and I were rescued by the Comanche after my husband abandoned us. We have lived with them since. The colonel's eyebrows rose. And you're here now as ... what? Their ambassador? I'm here to prevent unnecessary bloodshed, Sarah said firmly. The people of this settlement wish no conflict with the U.S. Army. They are willing to move north, away from your patrol route, if you will allow them to do so in peace. Colonel Harrison studied her, then looked at Lone Wolf and the other warriors. Mrs. Bennett, you must understand my position. I have orders to escort all Comanche in this territory to the reservation at Fort Sill. These are not negotiations. These are the terms set by the United States government. Sarah had expected this response, but it still filled her with dread. Colonel, the reservations are death traps. Disease, starvation, abuse by agents, you know this as well as I do. My orders don't concern themselves with conditions at the reservation, Harrison said, though a flicker of discomfort crossed his face. Only with delivering the Indians there. Sarah took a deep breath. And what about me and my daughter? We are not Comanche by blood, but we live as part of the tribe. Would you force us to the reservation as well? This clearly gave the colonel pause. You could return to white society, he suggested. There are missions, women's aid societies. This is my society now, Sarah interrupted. These people saved us when our own kind left us to die. My daughter knows no other life. She met his gaze directly. And I will not abandon them as my husband abandoned us. A tense silence followed. Finally, Harrison sighed. I can give you 3 days. Tell your people to be gone from this area by then. If we encounter them after that time, I will have no choice but to escort them to Fort Sill by force, if necessary. It wasn't a victory, but it was a reprieve. Sarah nodded. Thank you, Colonel. As they rode back to the settlement, Sarah felt both relief and sadness. The tribe would have to move again, further from the encroaching white world, but at least they had avoided immediate conflict. You spoke well, Lone Wolf said as they traveled. Your words have strong medicine. Not strong enough, Sarah replied. We're still being forced to leave. But we leave together, he pointed out. As a people, that is victory enough for today. When they returned to the settlement, Sarah reported the outcome to the council. Preparations for moving began immediately. Tippis dismantled, possessions packed, horses gathered. Emma helped Little Dove's daughter collect their small treasures, the 2 girls chattering in a mixture of Comanche and English. As twilight fell on their last night in the valley, Sarah stood on a small rise overlooking the disassembled camp. Lone Wolf joined her, his silent presence comforting in its familiarity. Where will we go? She asked. North, then east, he replied. There are mountains where soldiers do not go easily. We can find new hunting grounds. And when those grounds are taken too? The question had been weighing on her mind. Lone Wolf was silent for a long moment. The world changes like river changes course. We cannot stop it. We can only flow with it. Find new path. He turned to face her fully. But we do not face it alone. In his eyes, Sarah saw something that had been growing between them over the past 2 years, a connection deeper than friendship or gratitude. In the Comanche way, it had never been spoken of directly, but it was there in his protection, in his teaching, in his care for Emma. No, she agreed softly. Not alone. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah thought of the strange journey that had brought her here, from Boston merchant's daughter to frontier wife to abandoned mother to adopted member of a Comanche band. Each step had seemed like an ending at the time, but had proven instead to be a beginning. Tomorrow they would leave this valley, moving toward an uncertain future. But they would face it together, Sarah, Emma, Lone Wolf, and the people who had become their family. In a world determined to separate them, their unity was its own form of resistance. Their love for each other, a quiet defiance. As if reading her thoughts, Lone Wolf reached out and took her hand, a gesture crossing cultural boundaries, speaking a language both understood. Together, they watched the stars emerge, bright points of constancy in a changing world.